to a brand new episode of IPC Sneak Up Cloud, your favorite cloud-based talk show about all things in data center and cloud computing. In today's show, we'll be talking about hybrid cloud and the many benefits and advantages of using these for your business IT needs. I'm Lani Cortez, and I'd like to introduce our very special guest today. He's the CEO and co-founder of Cloud Sigma, which is one of the leading cloud providers with 9 locations in the world, including Manila. Ladies and gents, please welcome Mr. Robert Jenkins.
Thanks everybody for joining us, and thank you for having me this morning. It's great to be back in Manila as always.
Our pleasure. Thank you, Robert, for taking some time off from your busy schedule to be with us today. I'd like also to introduce my outstanding co-host, Mr. Paulo Mercado.
Thank you, Lani. Hello, Robert. This is a great day to discuss the importance and benefits of having a hybrid cloud solution. What does it really mean, and how can it help business in achieving its goals?
Okay, PM, let's shoot the questions.
So, Robert, there seems to be many interpretations of a hybrid setup. Can you give your take on this? What makes a server setup a hybrid?
Sure. So for me, the definition of a hybrid environment would be the combination of some sort of public infrastructure in some way with private infrastructure provisioning. Now, the public infrastructure would likely be virtual, meaning a public cloud of some kind, and the in-house infrastructure can be a combination of virtual or non-virtual assets as well. And so hybrid is really the bringing together of those two assets. So combining your own in-house infrastructure with essentially what is some sort of outsourced infrastructure in the public cloud.
All right.
Okay, I have a question here. What are the main benefits of hybrid setup, and what would motivate someone to adopt a hybrid infrastructure?
Sure. Well, I mean, basically the benefits you get from a hybrid setup are really a matter of leveraging the benefits that you would get from a public cloud, because that's what you're doing. You're adding the difference between a hybrid setup and a non-hybrid setup is the public cloud element, because obviously you keep your in-house infrastructure in either case. So really the benefit that you're getting from hybrid are the same benefits that you get from public cloud. So what we're looking at there is the idea that you can have elasticity, because you can, in the public cloud, provision new resources very quickly. You don't have to necessarily purchase them for a long time. So you have that agility in your infrastructure, which you don't have with your own in-house infrastructure, because then you have to purchase that. So that's just one benefit. Another benefit is you have a transparent total cost of ownership from public cloud, because you can see the price, it's the total price, so you can predict and budget for that. And another benefit, there are many benefits of public cloud actually, but just to give you a third one, the other thing is you get the abstraction from managing the physical infrastructure. But what that gives you is the ability to choose locations that you may not necessarily be able to manage yourself very effectively, but make sense for your business. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's say you're based here in Manila, you may have customers in Australia or in America or whatever, and a hybrid setup would allow you to spin up resources in those places close to your customers at low latency without actually having to go and visit Australia or America. Although you might want to visit Australia and America, maintaining servers every day is a different matter, right? From maybe going on holiday. So that's another example, and of course disaster recovery is also another example, because you can have your in-house infrastructure here in Manila potentially, and you might want to disaster recover to somewhere outside of the Philippines to be able to escape a large typhoon or something like that. So this is a third kind of benefit of hybrid.
All right.
That's a very important benefit, given that the Philippines do experience a lot of typhoons.
Yes, and don't forget volcanoes and earthquakes.
So you really
all of which are not. Yeah, I mean, we're laughing, but they're not funny. I mean, they're serious. Yeah.
Yeah, so following that, Robert, some hybrid professionals say that they have a hybrid deployment because A, they are ready to go cloud, but they don't want to throw away their existing hardware, and B, because they're not ready to go all cloud. Are these valid points to get into a hybrid setup?
Yes, I mean, it really depends on the individual company. I mean, everyone's infrastructure is different. That's why it's also an interesting area to work in. So I think that, yes, it is. So one thing is that when you start using the public cloud, you shouldn't use the fact that you have existing infrastructure as a reason not to. So that was kind of the first half of what you were saying. So yes, if you can start using the public cloud, you can start learning which is part of the process, right? So I always say just start in a small way, because the decisions you will make will be different after you've been using the public cloud for a year than at the beginning. You know, it's like when you start doing anything. When you start to drive, you shouldn't buy a Ferrari. Yeah,
Yes.
It's not a good idea on
Yeah.
your first day of driving. So the point is that there is an experience and a learning curve. And you know, even though for me I could just say yes, just bring everything to the cloud, the reality is it's much better for you to take baby steps and just start using the cloud, and then you will start understanding how it's going to work for you. What's the best setup for you? And so yes, so actually a hybrid is what I would recommend for most customers when they're getting started using public cloud. And then after that, it becomes more of a technological and commercial decision about what they want to continue to keep in-house versus exterior. And of course, their existing investments, they should leverage the existing investments that they have and make sure that use the equipment until it goes end of life. And then after this, they can make another decision. Do we want to renew that equipment, or do we want to move it to the public cloud? And if they've started already, then they're going to be in a much better position to make the correct decision for their business.
Okay, so let's say my hybrid setup consists of physical and cloud server, which I intend to deploy in a primary-secondary configuration, which should be functioning as primary, and the physical server or the cloud servers? And another question is, what type of company would I use the cloud as primary or vice versa?
Sure. Well, I'm going to be slightly biased in my answer, of course, because we run the public cloud. But no, I'll give you a pragmatic answer. So, which is a fair answer. So, okay, the arguments for using the public cloud as the primary would be that. So again, it's a matter of looking at your own business and comparing it to the cloud provider. So the cloud provider is going to give you 24/7 operations, 24/7 networking monitoring, 24/7 support, end user support in case anything goes wrong. Now, not every company has that, because it's a lot of people 24/7 to be available every day of the year, including Christmas, including overnight on Sundays, and so that you need a whole logistical operation behind that. So that's what you get from a cloud. So if your company has that in-house, okay, then that's not an advantage of cloud, it's just matching what you already have. But to be honest, most customers don't have that.
Yeah.
So one of the advantages of putting the primary in the cloud is an increase in reliability, because you have someone managing that and automatically going and fixing problems whenever they might happen. So that's, in my opinion, a huge advantage. Another advantage of using the cloud as a primary is that often the networking setup will be better. So for example, our cloud in Manila sits on multiple 10 gig lines. You don't pay for those 10 gig lines. You can have a small server and be paying 1,000 or a few thousand pesos a month, but you're getting 10 gig lines in terms of your connectivity and redundancy. So all of those things you get from a cloud. So depending on what's important for your setup, that might push you towards using the cloud as a primary. Now on the flip side, if you're using a hybrid, that might not be realistic, because you may not be able to move all of your stuff into the public cloud because it may cause issues with latency or whatever. So in that case, you may want to keep things in your own in-house, but then use the cloud as a disaster recovery, and then you can always see. So the first engagement normally is, I have my own infrastructure, I'm going to add public cloud maybe as a disaster recovery, and then the reality is, if they keep seeing that their primary site is less reliable than the cloud, meaning that the cloud's up and they keep having disasters in inverted commas in their own infrastructure, then they can always flip the two around.
So I say I'm a company owner and I decided to go hybrid. So what will be the challenges in terms of migration if I want to move my on-premise servers to the cloud?
Sure. So there are a number of considerations, and this varies by cloud to cloud. So in some clouds, the way you set up your networking and the compatibility of different operating systems varies, so you won't always be able to move things like for like.
Okay.
Actually, in the case of Cloud Sigma, we've done a lot of work to make sure that it's neutral. So actually, you can move any x86, x64 based system into our cloud unmodified. Like literally. So you can move any, like FreeBSD, which is like more exotic stuff. You can move any version of Linux, any version of Windows, one to one, and it will boot up in Cloud Sigma, just the way it boots up in-house. So in our case, I can say you can move pretty much anything into our cloud. So then it just comes down to, basically we wanted to take away the technological constraints and just make it a commercial decision for the provider, for the customer, so that the customer can just say what makes sense for us to move to the cloud. The other, of course, the other challenge can be volume of data.
All right.
So if you have really a lot of data, then moving it from A to B is a challenge in itself, especially if you don't want extended downtime.
Yes.
So there are a number of solutions in that case where we've worked with customers. So for example, one customer that we have, we've basically upgraded their line temporarily so that they can kind of push all the data into the cloud, and we're able to do that also with our collaboration with IPC here in Manila. Another option is physical. So I know it sounds kind of old-fashioned, but if you have terabytes and terabytes or tens of terabytes of data, we can do a physical ingest. So you can literally take, kind of like sync all your data onto a storage device, you give it to us, we ingest it in the cloud, and then we can do a final sync of the changes that happened when we were doing that ingest. And we've done that for customers. We did this for a big digital asset management company, and they had hundreds of terabytes of data, and they were kind of basically moving it into the cloud doing this. And once it was done, it was great. Everything worked perfectly. And so you can, even if you have a lot of data, move it to the cloud. So the short answer is, you need a strategy that works for you, and you need a cloud provider that's working hand in hand with you to make that strategy successful.
Okay. So, a follow-up question: are there any compatibility issues for hardware cloud configuration?
Well, as I said, in our case, no. If you're on x86, x64 hardware, if you're using something like Spark or some like IBM type stuff, which is non kind of Intel type hardware, then yes, there can be issues, but this is a very small percent of people's computing generally. So in general, for us, I would say no. If you're using kind of a Windows or Linux or Unix based system, you won't have any issues moving it to the cloud. And also importantly, the networking. So we have a virtual wire implementation on the private networking. What that means is that the network that you have in the cloud is actually behaving exactly like your corporate internal network, like a virtual Ethernet between all your machines. So you can do all sorts of networking, like multicast type networking, exotic things that you would do actually normally in a corporate network. So basically you can take a mirror and move it. And that's one of the reasons why we're a very good cloud for disaster recovery, because you can literally mirror the setup that you have in-house into the cloud. Because there's no point in having a disaster recovery setup if it takes you 2 days to reconfigure it to make it work. So you need something where you can just like spin it up. So that's also another consideration.
All right. So does a cloud hybrid make sense, or is this a form of hybrid in the first place?
Sure. Well, I would say it's not hybrid really. It's more like multi-location. But I mean, this is all semantics. It's not that important. But yeah, I mean, it's just another way of gaining resilience, basically. So hybrid, if you can use hybrid to increase your reliability, like through disaster recovery and other things. This is one reason to use hybrid. So in this sense, it's an extension of that same concept. But I wouldn't call it hybrid in itself. I think it's more like just a kind of multi-location. So it's just the same as if you had your own in-house infrastructure and you had 2 locations. You wouldn't call this hybrid necessarily. So I wouldn't call it hybrid, but it's a variation on a theme. So multi-cloud strategy would give you the same benefits. For example, having disaster recovery between 2 clouds, also having the ability to maybe span 2 locations. If you have the right architecture, you can have both locations in a kind of live setup. But this needs to be architected into the software. So you get some of the benefits of hybrid by having multi-cloud, and it's a very good strategy because you can really abstract yourself in terms of having multiple locations that kind of don't correlate in terms of outages, as well as your own in-house kind of applications. So if you have a problem in one cluster, you can still be servicing customers from the other cluster.
I see.
Okay. You mentioned the benefits of hybrid approach, but I want to ask this question: how can I determine if my system is benefiting from hybrid approach?
Okay, so some things to look at would be the utilization. So is your setup running at a high utilization? So if your setup's not running at a very high average utilization, then it's pretty wasteful. So another way of putting it is, do you have a kind of variability in your infrastructure requirements? So most people do. So they might have periodic tasks which run on top of the everyday load, and then those cause the company to have more infrastructure. But actually, most of the time, it's not being used. In fact, most enterprises have pretty low utilization on their infrastructure. So what you can do is you can sort of take off that top slice and say, well, these periodic tasks, for example, this would be a starting point. These periodic tasks, why are we running them in-house when they only need like 6 hours 3 times a week? Let's take them, put them in the cloud, and then we can just take out that infrastructure. When it becomes end of life, that's kind of the time we'll look to move it to the cloud, and we can kind of like sort of slice off different layers of infrastructure and start putting them in the cloud where we can more efficiently run them. So these are the kind of considerations you should look at, as well as, where are the logical partitions in your infrastructure? Meaning, where can you kind of break your infrastructure and say, let's put this in the cloud and keep this in-house? And these are kind of more technical considerations around latency and things like that. Now, that's where you can do a very kind of, that's where you can benefit from a really kind of end-to-end approach where you have your in-house infrastructure, the networking provider and the cloud provider collaborating, so you can, for example, reduce the latency between the two locations and things like this, and have assured connectivity. And this allows you to move more to the cloud. And this is why we work with people like you guys, because then we can provide that kind of end-to-end solution for customers. But that's the logic behind it. The logic behind it is that we can provide these solutions where you can really seamlessly integrate the public element into your own private infrastructure. And that allows you to do things that you couldn't otherwise do.
Absolutely.
I think, Robert, this question is very important for those who want to go cloud. What is the cost impact of going hybrid versus going all cloud? Or will the resiliency of hybrid outweigh the added efforts?
Sure. So again, it depends on what the kind of metrics are with the company. The more underutilized they are internally, then the more obvious and compelling the case is to move it to the cloud from a pure cost saving perspective.
Yes.
The other thing I would say is that people rarely do a fair comparison between the cost of public cloud and in-house. So they'll like look at the cost of equipment in-house, and then they'll compare that to the cloud, and they'll say, well, I can buy a server for this much, like $1,000, but in your cloud it's this much per month, which works out being more than $1,000 over 2 years or 3 years. But that's not a fair comparison, because in the cloud it's not a server that you're buying, you're actually buying really the service, which includes all the other stuff that sits on top of that, including virtualization software, which you don't have to license, plus all the other services, etc. So if you take a real total cost of ownership in the cloud and you compare it to, which is basically the price in the cloud, and you compare it in-house, then generally the cloud is competitive on that basis. But I would change it, and I would say, okay, so first you have to establish that the cloud is not going to be a significant increase in cost. But the real value of cloud is the business value. So what do I gain by being able to provide higher quality services in the cloud? So for example, putting infrastructure nearer customers, having higher uptime. What's the value to my business of that? And the value to your business on that, forget about saving 20% on your IT or whatever, this is irrelevant compared to that value. Because if I can be more innovative as a company, and I can have a higher service quality, that allows me to beat my competitors, and then I can grow exponentially. So the value is massive compared to that. So that's actually an unlimited potential value compared to the limited defined value of cost saving. So of course we need to make sure that budgets are kept, etc. But really the way to think about public cloud is not just where I can save money, but is it like, how can it make my company more innovative? How can I increase the service quality to my end users, be they internal or in the company, or external customer facing services? And if you look at public cloud in that way, then you'll get the most value from it.
I see.
Okay, this question is for those who are decided to adapt the hybrid cloud. Okay, so how are they going to assess the load mix in a hybrid environment, like 60-40 for physical and 40 for the cloud? So kindly cite examples based on the industry practices.
Sure. So I kind of half answered that already. So it comes down to the mix of the use cases for your infrastructure internally and then basically the kind of load curve associated with that, so how much variability there is. So if you have, on the one extreme end, if you had one single thing that you were doing internally
Yes.
and it never varied, then your potential for moving to the cloud would be much less, unless you decided it was running better in the cloud, than somebody that might have multiple use cases internally and a lot of variability. So in their case, they can say, okay, so this service is varying, this service is periodic, let's move them to the cloud. It's really difficult to say a percentage. You know, I can give you an example like a bank. So banks, you might think it's hard for banks to move infrastructure to the cloud, but actually banks have a lot of computing that's associated with their trading and with their risk management. So every night, all the banks in the world, when you're sleeping, kind of thing, they basically they look at they do value at risk calculations, which are basically calculating their positions and seeing their sensitivity. So if the yen moves 10% against the dollar, you know, they've got to not be bankrupt. Basically, they've got to be within certain tolerances. There's so many variables. They have tens of millions of calculations that they make. They do this every day, but they only do it for about 6 to 8 hours, most banks. So we work with banks in Europe to move that use case into the cloud. So to say what percent of that internal computing it is difficult to say, but maybe it's like, you know, 10, 15%. But that's kind of the way you do it. You look at individual uses and then you say, so actually what you're doing is moving 100% of that into the cloud, which is maybe then 10% of the overall. But I would say that, you know, most enterprises have a significant percentage of their computing that could be run in the cloud, and they could get business value from doing that, meaning they would either get, as I said, improved reliability or improved agility in the service or cost savings. So, you know, or a combination of those.
Absolutely.
Say, for instance, that I adopted hybrid cloud and I want to have a system and there is one management across my hybrid setup. Is this possible? Will the management treat both public and private infrastructure as one, or will it be treated as separate zones?
Sure. So there's multiple layers to that. So the first is on the networking side, this is the main thing really if you want to try and unify them. So on the networking side, you need to create a unified setup if you want to really unify the environment. So to do that, you can use, we have a solution, and there are other clouds that have other solutions. We have a solution basically where you can take a point-to-point line and you can map that into your private network in the cloud. What that does in effect is give you a single network. So a server running in your in-house infrastructure will be able to see all of the cloud servers in a single network, and that doesn't use the internet. So all the data is encrypted, and it's also on a dedicated line, and so you can set that up. So if you set that up, that as a kind of base foundation, you can unify the two environments. Because if the networking is not unified, you're not going to be able to unify the rest. So that's the starting point. So having a unified network is a kind of good foundation if you really, this is important to you, and that's, as I said, possible. And then after that, you then need to look at, the management and things like that. So in the case of Cloud Sigma, we have an API. It has 100% coverage of all features, like literally. I mean, our web app is built on our API. So this proves that our API has all the features, otherwise you wouldn't be able to see it in the web app. And that's deliberate because it forces us to make sure everything's always available on the web app. So in terms of that web app can then be, the API can be integrated into other systems. And in fact, we have this. So if you are running OpenStack, for example, we have a driver in OpenStack. So you could be running OpenStack in your in-house environment with a driver that's actually talking to Cloud Sigma over the API, and you're able to then manage the stuff in Cloud Sigma. This is one example. There are other integrations available as well, where you can basically create a unified setup. So yes, it obviously depends, but in many cases you can create this unified management setup between both the private and public cloud.
Thank you very much, Robert, for allowing us to pick your brains and for sharing your valuable insights about hybrid cloud. Would you have any parting words for our viewers?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
It's always it's always fun to talk about this stuff. I enjoy it. But yeah, so I mean, I would just, as a summary, I would say with regards to hybrid, I would say the thing to do is just to get started, and really don't make it into an academic exercise. People are sort of like on paper saying, oh, we should do this, maybe we should do that. But the reality is, if you have no experience using public cloud, your opinion of relatively low value compared to someone that actually has experienced both management of in-house and public cloud. So, you know, even if you decide not to use public cloud, you should still go and try it and understand what it can be, because then you're making an informed decision. And that's all we ask. And that's what I would say, encourage people to do. So it's like, go and try it, see how it works, you know, and then basically, and then educate yourself. And then at that point, you can then make an informed decision about whether it makes sense to you or not.
Okay.
And, you know, that's something you may come back to in a year, and it might not be right for you now, and it might be right for you in a year, etc. So that would be my kind of overall advice. Kind of just get started in a small way, start getting some experience, and then, you know, and then you'll be basically more valuable to your company, as you know, in terms of the advice you can give them.
So Robert, that's a very good point to say. And with that said, and to watch the replay of this episode and check out our previous episodes, just go to thinkoutcloud.ph or visit the IPC YouTube page. Also, please visit cloud.ipc.ph for our cloud infrastructure.
And of course, thanks everyone for watching this episode of Think Out Cloud. We hope you gained some additional knowledge with regards to hybrid cloud solution. For more information, please visit www.ipc.ph. Until then, see you on the next episode of Think Out Cloud. Goodbye.
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 If you like what you've seen, you may also watch our previous Think Out Cloud episode.
Go to www.thinkoutcloud.ph and share it to your friends.